Hi, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Today's format's a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a mix down for a client. So let's jump in. So here we are in Studio One. Now I just want to explain something quite quickly. When I mix, I like to mix fast. I like to be in a position within an hour and a half to 2 hours, if it's a straightforward track, to be printing my first draft. Not necessarily the print that I would play to the client, but certainly a print that I can sit down and listen to after a couple of hours break or the next morning. So I work quickly. I make sure that I know my plugins inside out so that if I come up against any situation, I know exactly what plugin I want to use. I know that I need a Pultec here, I need to use a Neve preamp here, I want an SSL EQ here, I want an API preamp here, etc. So it's just knowing your plugins inside out, and I can't emphasize that enough, that it's better to know 10 or 20 plugins back to front than have 300-400 plugins on your computer that you don't really understand. It just, when you work quickly, you want to just be able to reach for exactly what you need, know that it can solve the problem or enhance what you're trying to do. For me, when I mix, it's kind of like a performance. I started DJing in the mid-80s, around about the same time I started working in studios. And especially when I mix dance music, I like to really be able to get into it. I like it to make me move, to nod my head. And I hope that that translates in the mix downs I do for clients. So do excuse me if I'm kind of getting into it a little bit, but I like to introduce movement into it. I like it to feel as though I'm actually DJing with the peaks and troughs, moving the EQ around, panning, the effects, the breakdowns feeling like they would in a club. And like I said, it's kind of like a performance. So here we have a track by a client called Mascot. They're a client that I work with quite a lot. I mix and master a lot of their tracks. This is quite a simple track. As you can see, it's got some drum stems. The low percussion, which is claps and snares, are all part of the same track. High percussion, which is hats and cymbals, they're all part of the same track. And there's some percussion as well, which is some congas, program congas and stuff I seem to remember. Then obviously there's a bass line. I've kept the bass stereo because there's some side information in the bass that I'd like to keep and I'd like to spread out over the mix, but keeping the main bottom end of the bass in the center of the mix. So I've kept it stereo for that reason. More often than not, I will have my bass in mono pretty much all the time, but sometimes in EDM and dance, deep house, I will keep the stereo bass so that I can have some side information on the bass as well, especially if the bass is a sound that has some frequencies, you know, kind of up in 5K, 7K. Then we have a couple of synth tracks, which is a string and a 303, as you can see just here. We have some stabs and some little kind of vocal parts and then some fills. So it's a fairly straightforward track. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up the mixer. Normally I have this on a separate screen, but obviously for this situation, I'm going to have it all on the same screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get a quick balance. So let's just pull down those faders. Let's just find a part of the track. Let's go to part 2 here and just loop that. And just start bringing some of the parts in. I like to kind of build the track around the kick. It's always the first part of the mix that I start with if it's dance music. And the way that my console is set up is pretty much how I go through the mix. I start with my drums, I then move on to the bass. I will then work on the instrument parts, which in this case is some synths, and the stabs and fills, etc. And then right at the end would be vocals, which is normally here, but there aren't really any vocals in this track, so I haven't got a separate vocal track. And then obviously over here I have my buses. So my drums are going to my kicks, low perc, high perc percussion, which then goes to my drum bus. And then I have my bass. Guitars, there's no guitars on this, there's no horns on this either, or no vocals, so I could actually hide those. Okay, so let's get a rough mix. Also, I just want to point out that on my main interface channel I have ADPTR, and on here is a rough mix of the original track. Now that's a rough mix that the client did and sent me with all the stems, so I have an idea where the client wants the mix to kind of go. So I just want to get a quick rough mix myself first. So I start off with a very, very rough mix, just really to get the levels kind of in a rough kind of place. Obviously there's no EQ or anything on there yet. And the reason why I do that is because I mix top down. So I get a rough mix first, then I start working on the mix bus. I then start working on the buses, and then I start working on the individual channels if they need any more processing. So on the mix bus for this, I'm thinking, because of the way the track is, let's just jump forward to this. Obviously I want a nice heavy bottom end, nice crisp top end, and a lot of the instruments, the 303, even the bass sound, have a lot of information in the mid-range. So what I'm going to do is, on the mix bus, I'm going to start with the Pro C2 from FabFilter. What I love about the Pro C2 is it gives you the ability to sidechain the compression internally and set up whereabouts in the frequency range you want to compress. What I want to do is I just really want to compress the mid-range, so probably around about 400 to maybe 3K. Have a bit of a shallow, let's just have a listen. What's great as well is you can audition, so you can hear exactly what you are actually compressing. I could probably put some emphasis on that as well. So I'm really just compressing that part of the signal and not touching the bottom end or the top end. So just compressing the mid-range, and then after this I'm going to put a mix bus compressor on there like an SSL. In fact, it will be an SSL, just to kind of glue the whole track together. But I've compressed the mid-range of the track, which is kind of bringing the mid-range forward overall in the mix. So about 2 decibels of gain reduction. Also, what I love about the Pro C2 is you can actually hear what you're compressing. Around about 1.7 to 2, I don't want anything too drastic. Maybe a little bit softer. I want to bring the attack up to around about 30 milliseconds. So if you listen on headphones, you'll be able to hear when I bring the compressor in, it kind of, although it's compressing the mid-range, it actually brings the mid-range forward in the mix. If you just listen really carefully when I bypass it and bring it back in again. So I'll start off with it bypassed. And listen to the mid-range, the 303 and the vocal and the stabs. So I've got the desired effect there, that's great. Save, always save. And now I will put a SSL on there. I'm going to use the SSL from SSL because also it has oversampling on it, which I'll set to 2. And with this, I really just want to be kind of teasing the needle a little bit. It's really just to glue everything together. Attack at 30, release at 0.1, 2 or 3 ratio, probably 2 on this track, and I don't want to touch the bottom end again, so I bring the high pass filter up on the side chain. Yeah, 3's a little bit too much. And I'll probably mix some of the dry signal in as well, around about 75%. So for me, that nicely just glues everything together overall. Probably bring up everything on this as well, actually, thinking about it. I'm happy with being around about there for the moment. So the next thing I'd want to do is I would add some EQ overall on the mix bus. On music like this, lately I've been using the Better Maker from Plugin Alliance. The reason why I love this so much is it's kind of like a Pultec, but it has the ability to EQ the mid-range as well. So I'm thinking I want to just boost the bottom end a little bit, add a bit of brightness in the top end, maybe a little bit of 5K, and possibly dip out around about 180. And I'll high pass it around about 22-ish, just to get rid of all the really low information that I definitely don't need. Probably 60. What I love about this EQ is it immediately just, everything opens up. It just kind of, for me, just makes everything sound thicker and girthier, and I don't want to say warmer because it's quite a clean EQ. It's a really odd one, this one, because I kind of feel like the Better Maker is a colour EQ. I tend to use it as a colour EQ, but it does it in such a clean way, and that's a really weird thing to say, but it manages to kind of bring character to a track, but still keep it quite clean. I want to be quite broad bandwidth here, maybe about . See, I absolutely love the 5K on this EQ. So that's pretty much the mix bus treatment that I would do on a track like this. Really just sort of control, compression, some compression to glue the track together, and then just a bit of EQ. I may add a bit of saturation later on, maybe a tape plug-in, maybe the UAD ATR 102, maybe the Studio A800, possibly something like Saturn from FabFilter. But at the moment, until I really get into the depth of the mix, I'll probably stick with that. Just do a quick check on where we are in terms of volume. You see, without even checking, I just knew that I'd be round about 0. I mean, that's pretty much spot on. So now I would start working on the drum bus. Something I love using on the drum bus is the API 2500 UAD version of it. The reason why I like the UAD version of it is because I can use the mix knob a lot easier without having to set up a parallel. So probably would have this on the tone. I would use the new style, normally have the high pass filter on there. I would set it up pretty much the same way I would set up an SSL on a mix bus. Ratio around about 2, release quick as possible, attack slow as possible, maybe 10 sometimes, and about 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction, and then I'd probably use the mix knob just to blend in some of the dry signal. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. Now I want to put some tape saturation on there, so I'm going to go for the Studer, again from UAD. Pretty much always use the 456 at 15. It's just a sound that I'm really, really used to. I used to use the same machine, I used to use a 456 tape. For me, it just gives a really nice warm kind of compression. The sweet spot generally is around about -1 to 0. Make sure you level match so you can hear what the plugin is actually doing rather than being fooled by it being louder. It just sounds to me like it's slightly rolling off the top end, which is the effect that I want. Next I'm going to go for the old classic, which is the inflator. Now, I use the old 32-bit version of it. I didn't see any point in updating. It sounds exactly the same. It's just 32-bit instead of 64, and I use J-Bridge, as you can see just there. I mean, this just does something magic on drums, to be honest with you. It just does something. I still don't really know what it does. I don't think anybody does. There's forums about it where people discuss what this actually does, but I just love the sound of it. I love what it does to drums. I like to drive it into about 0. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the output on the Studer just a little bit. So I'm driving a bit more volume into inflator. That's what I want to see, the odd red light on inflator. I'm driving that a bit too hard on the output there now. Okay, now I want to add just a little bit more saturation, so I'm going to use Saturn. Just a clean tube. I think I prefer that off actually. I'm going to leave linear phase on for this. And then what I tend to do in my drums is I just put a limiter on there, not really to have any effect, but really just to catch peaks. And I like to have my drum bus around about -7, -8. So Oxford limiter again. Again, I use the 32-bit version of it with J-Bridge. Take this back to about -8. To release about 8, 10, something like that. So now I'm going to start working on the individual drums, and I'm going to really go through this quite quickly. So by all means, pause it, copy the settings, and I will explain what I'm doing as I go. But I have, listening to this, I already have in my mind where I want to go, where I want it to go. What I tend to do when I sit down and have a listening session before I actually start mixing and with mastering as well, I visualize in my head where I want the mix to be, taking everything into account, where I want the mix to end up, taking into account what the client wants, if they've given me any creative license, the references that they've provided, the inspiration that they might have, the inspiration that I might have from the mix, and I kind of know where it's going to go. I almost start mapping out what plugins I'm going to use, and before I've even started. So I know where I want the drums to be, so I will go through this quickly, but I will explain to you what I'm doing as I go. Now with a kick drum, it feels to me like it just needs a little bit of bottom end. So I'm going to use a Pultec. Again, I use the UAD one. Just used to the sound on it. About 60. There's a whole bunch of videos about what I just did there using the Pultec trick, Pultec magic, or whatever they like to call it, where basically you're boosting the frequency, but you're also attenuating the frequency, and rather than just giving like a bump where you've boosted the frequency, you kind of have a scoop at the end of the frequency that you've boosted. And what it does is it gives you the bottom end that you want, but it keeps it really tight, and it's not like a flappy bottom end. The Pultec's a very broad stroke EQ, which is what you really kind of want for, especially with low end, because of the shape of the frequencies down there. So 60 hertz, something I quite often do. Sometimes it's 100. Tends to be 100 more if it's maybe acoustic music or sometimes hip hop. And I'll boost it 2 to 3, and then I'll just attenuate it kind of around about half the amount that I boosted it. That's generally, you know, obviously I always use my ears. What I really like again about the Pultec from UAD, their version in particular, is I feel like it kind of opens up the sound. It kind of gives it some instant kind of depth and width, even on a mono sound. And I'm not saying it's any better than anybody else's Pultecs. I also use Noise Ash, I also use Waves, I use some Pultecs from Acoustica Audio, from Analog Obsession. I think I use IK Multimedia's Pultec sometimes. They're all Pultecs that have slightly different characteristics. I use the TubeTech version of it sometimes. That's great on pianos. And I like I said, I know my plugins. I know for me personally, when it comes to kick drums in dance music, especially 909s and that style of kick, where it has a really girthy bottom end and maybe a little bit of a kind of hit around about 5K. I love using the UAD Pultec for that. And I'll use it just to boost the bottom end. So moving on. What I would generally do with most instruments in the drums is I will put a high pass filter. Just to start off with, I will use a stock plugin. In this case, Studio One is the Pro EQ, and I have it set as default at 80 Hertz, but obviously I will then adjust it accordingly, because you shouldn't ever do anything by default. I have actually done a video on that as well. Now you can see on the hats and the snares and the claps, there's not much information below 80, but I don't really want to attenuate rather too much around here, because this is where a lot of the body is in snares. You can see it here. I also listen to it in context. See, I can hear now that I want to dip some out here. I'm not going to do too much work with this EQ here. This is really just a clean up EQ, because I will actually be doing some EQ work and compression work on the low percussion bus. So I've really just cleaned up there. Then on the bus, I will use something like Mag. Boosting the body down here. Now for snare drums, low percussion in particular, I love this EQ. Actually, I love this EQ on everything, to be honest. It's really simple. Whoever invented it just knew where to put these frequencies. It's great for mastering, it's great for bus work, it's great for individual work. It's amazing on snares. Most people seem to go on about using it on vocals. I'm not too keen on using it on vocals, to be honest. But for snares and hi-hats and percussion, bass, it's great. Guitars, acoustic guitars, it's really, really nice on. And then I just want to add a bit of compression. I'm going to go for the old classic, DBX 160, again from UAD. Waves also do a DBX 160, Arturia do one, and Analog Obsession, which is a free version, they've just released an excellent DBX 160. Just gives it a bit of smack. Take it back to about between 3 and 4. I just want it to be flicking it, really. The original mix and the parts that I was sent, there's a bit of reverb on the clap. And what I love, I actually quite like it. Sometimes people will always say, oh, you have to send me the dry parts, always send me dry parts. But, you know, I want the client to send me, if they want to send me wet, they can send me wet. In a perfect world, I get sent wet and dry. But sometimes little things can happen when you've got wet parts that might not have happened if you're just working on the dry. And especially in this particular case, this compressor, because it's got a real smack kind of sound to it, but it's bringing up the tail of the reverb. So it's actually helping me create a groove with the snare drums and the claps. See, if I take it off, you can't really hear the tails of the claps, but when I have the compressor in, it's bringing and it's almost like I've put a sidechain on the snare from the kick. So it's moving on to the hats now. Again, I just really want to clean up with this EQ, not going to do too much work on it. I'll do most of the work on the actual... Actually, no, thinking about it. So actually what I want to do here is I'm going to use the Auto-Dynamic EQ from Melder. I really love this EQ. The reason why I want to use a dynamic EQ here is I want to brighten up the hi-hats, but I don't want it to be sort of too sizzly and wishy-washy. So this dynamic EQ just has a really nice way of introducing a groove into the part. And also, I just want to get rid of, there's a kind of frequency that I don't like. I just really like the way this EQ is set out. The saturation on it's great. The way that you can sculpt the EQ how you want it. I love FabFilter's Pro Q3 as well, but there's just something about this EQ that just, I don't know, I don't want to say I prefer it, but in certain situations I do prefer it to the Pro Q3. I will reach for the Pro Q3 daily, and it's surprising I haven't used it yet actually. But this one, just with this saturation, and it's just a little bit more hands-on. I feel like I can get to what I need to get to a lot quicker. This I don't use at all. It creates some really, really odd harmonics, so I don't touch that. But by all means, if you have this EQ, try it out. And then on the bus, I'm just going to add some overall EQ and a little bit of compression just to do something with the transients. So in Studio One, you can just drag across there, and obviously I need to change the settings. Let's just zero that quickly. Has such a subtle shelf on the mag. Like, I would not normally push 3 dB of gain, if in fact that is what that figure means in terms of dB, at 10, but for some reason on the mag it's just really, really subtle, but yet it just... Do you know what, to be totally brutally honest with you, I don't exactly know what is going on here, but I love the way that it sounds. It's one of my favourite shelves. And the combination with these shelves, or sorry, the airband rather, I guess they call it, but you know, it is basically a shelf. Okay, one more thing I just want to do here is a little trick that I use sometimes using a Waves compressor called Presonus X, which is meant to be for guitars. If you've seen some of my videos, you may already have seen me do this with hi-hats. It just does something to hi-hats. Again, I'm not exactly sure what it does underneath the hood. It's meant to be a compressor for guitars, I think. I think I just said that. I assume by the axe that's what it's meant to be for. But I love it on hi-hats. Make sure you level match. It just does something to the transients. And just gives it a bit of life. I'm constantly going back to the mix bus just to check that the compressors and the mix bus are doing what I want them to do, which is around about 2 decibels of gain reduction and just flicking a little bit there. Remember that if you do work top down, you do need to constantly go back and check that. If you have tape plugins, it's good to go back and check that. Everything is still doing what I want it to do. Probably a little bit higher than I want to be on the... That sounds about right. Just cutting a little bit of the bottom end of this bass sound off. Now what I want to do here is I want to give the bass some bottom end, but also some, it's a synth, real synthy type sort of sound, quite gritty. So I may add maybe a lo-fi plug-in to it, and also I'm going to, firstly I'm going to compress it. I tend to use a LA2A. I love the UAD grey version on a bass. And I'm going to add an effects channel, which is in Synths. Sorry, my bad. That one, that's a little bit annoying. Right, here we go. So add an effects channel here. I always make my effects channels yellow, so I know they're effects channels. As you can see, I've got effects channels here with the same. Okay, let's just take that back a little bit. And on here, I'm going to put the Dimension Chorus. This is the UAD version. Arturia do a version, and quite a few other plugin companies do. And what that does is it just gives the bass a bit of width. Like I said earlier on, I've kept the bass in stereo because I do like some of the side information on it. So the main girthy part of it is going to be boosted. It's going to be in mono, but I'm going to have this side information kind of chorusy kind of effect. Very, very subtle. Just kind of giving it, almost making it, putting it in the kind of league of a lead instrument, but it's still the bass. And I'll send that to the bass bus as well. It just kind of opens it up. And I want to add just a bit of bottom end on this, and I will use the Pasek SPL, also from Plugin Alliance, just because I love the bottom end on this. I don't know another plugin that has the kind of warm, girthy bottom end that this EQ does. And what I'm actually going to do So I've just kind of boosted the bottom end at about 80 Hertz, but just in the mid rather than the side. Okay, let's work on this percussion. With the percussion, I'm going to add in some auto pan. I use the Melder auto pan, really, really straightforward, just does the job. Just really easily add some movement to the percussion. And because this is sampled, I don't really need to do a lot of compression or EQ on it. As is the case with a lot of sounds when you're working with EDM, you don't have to do a huge amount of EQ or compression on them unless it's creative, because they've already been EQ'd and compressed. So you really don't have to just start throwing loads of processing on, because it has kind of already been done for you. What I do want to do now at this point is start adding some reverbs and delays in. Now I have on my template some reverb and delays already set up. I have the EQ set up for them. Pretty standard Abbey Road style EQ for reverbs and delays. Getting rid of the bottom end, getting rid of some of the top end. And then I will choose which reverbs and delays I want to use. So I want to go for kind of a percussion-y type sort of reverb, and I want a nice long clean reverb as well. And then maybe a dirty delay and a quite clean delay, maybe an eighth and maybe a quarter. Pretty standard stuff really. So I'm going to go for the Lexicon 224, the EMT 250. Again, because I know these plugins, I know what I visualize in my head what I want to happen, so I know which plugin to reach for. This I'm going to go for the Audeze TC220, 2290, sorry. I have my preset set up on there for eighth delay. I use this all the time. And then Waves, the old faithful H delay. It's like Marmite. People either love it or hate it. Personally, I love it. And let's just take that up a little bit. And I've got quarters on there. I'm going to make that ping pong as well, actually, just to add a bit of movement. Studio One, select all the channels you want. Hold down Control, and it takes you to Unity Gain if you just click on it. Just a quick little tip there for Studio One users. Then what I tend to do is I tend to name them just so I know. It's more to do with what comes up on here, to be honest, so I know what I'm adjusting. EMT 250, TC 2290, H delay. On here, I kind of want, well, I have a preset actually that I tend to use quite a lot for percussion. EMT, I just want a clean hall type kind of thing, so take that off, have a bit of a pre-delay on there, take the noise off, don't need that. Again, it just adds kind of weird harmonics in there. I want a little bit of compression on the percussion, probably the API 2500 again. I'm going to take the transits off just a little bit, so I'm going to have the attack at about 10. And because I've got auto pan on, I'm going to bring this LR link back just a little bit. Not all the way. All right, so now I'm going to start working on the synth parts and the stab parts. Now, if I remember from the original mix, the client really kind of wanted the 303 to be kind of a lead instrument in this, so he wanted it quite loud in the mix. Obviously in that rough mix it's really forward. So just as a guide, I know that that's kind of what he wants. At the moment it's sat quite far back in the mix, so I'm going to bring that up. I'm going to use an LA2A again. Let's just bring up what's my, okay. Just wanted to check how much I was doing on the UAD work here. A bit of saturation, let's use Saturn. I want some movement in that as well. I use a plugin from Waves called Brower Motion Stereo, which is great. I mean, it's pretty good just opening it up on the preset, to be honest. I mean, that immediately just adds some nice movement in it. Pretty standard thing. I just want it doing something so it's not too flat. Probably a little bit too much. So let's do some work on these stabs. Let's just draw a loop in here. Let's just bring these sends onto here. Another great thing I love about Studio One is you can just click and drag anything. Obviously I don't want exactly the same settings. This is what is on the high synth, but let's just take that to the loop. You see, because I knew I was going to use H delay on these particular parts, that's why I've used the ping pong, because again, it does a bit of work for me, a bit of movement going on, a bit of auto panning, thinking ahead, knowing my plugins. These are probably going to need a little bit of cleanup work, so I could just put a Pro EQ on there. Every DAW is going to have a stock EQ. Studio One, it's called Pro EQ. They're all much the same. They've all got really good stock EQs now. Every DAW has. Again, using the H delay to create some movement. Just has to be subtle. You don't really necessarily want to hear it and say, hey, listen everybody, I've put a ping pong delay on. But if you do it very, very subtly, it's creating movement without, it's more of a feel rather than you actually hearing it and making a statement with it. And playing quarters and eighths off against each other is a really nice thing to do in EDM and dance music. Right where I want to be. Now this is getting in the ballpark for a print for me now, and I think I've been working on it for about an hour. Now obviously, you know, it's what there's like I don't know, maybe 10 tracks, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12 tracks or whatever. I need to do a bit of work on the fill here, but I'm getting to the point now where I would print, and what I tend to do is I tend to work on 2 or 3 tracks at the same time when I'm doing mix downs, and I get to a point in one track and I kind of feel like I can't go any further with it right now. I'll jump to the next track and I'll work on that. And so, you know, and then I'll go back to the original track. And quite often, especially if I'm working on EPs and albums, I do this because I like to have a sense of continuity in an album and an EP. And clients come to me for that reason with albums and EPs that I've done for them before. There's like a sound that will be throughout the album or the EP. And I guess the way that I get that is from working on 2 or 3, sometimes 5 mixes at the same time. So I don't want to say bored, because bored's not the right word, but if let's use the word bored. If I get to a point in the mix where I'm bored of it, I'll move on to the next track. I'll do a quick print of that one, and then I'll move on to the next one. And I might do something in the next track that makes me think, oh, actually, yeah, I could do that with snares on the track that I was just working on. And again, it's kind of like a flow almost, you know, like if I was a DJ where I've got 3 or 4 tracks going on, and one of them will inspire me with the other one, etc. But also it keeps you fresh and it keeps you on your toes. One of the main reasons why I like working quickly, I don't, even with tracks with 50 or so tracks, which I rarely get nowadays, to be honest, I tend to work on dance, EDM and hip hop. And there doesn't tend to be more than 20 tracks, 25 tracks maximum on a lot of those tracks. So, but even with those, I won't spend more than an hour to an hour and a half on my first print, and then I might go back and tweak some. Sometimes I've sent prints that have taken me an hour and a half to the mastering guy, and they've been happy. The client's been happy. Sometimes, obviously, you get changes. Sometimes I'll get up the next morning and I want to change something, but I like to work quick, and that's why it's so important to know your plugins. That's why you need to be able to listen to a track, visualize it, and decide where you want to take it. It might not be where you end up, but it's really good to have a direction. There's the road I want to drive down. That's where I want to get to. Now I might turn off, you know, all the analogies that you can think of, but it's good to visualize. It's good to have an idea where you want to go, and to back that up, to know the plugins that you want to use almost before you even use them. I know, for instance, when I used the SPL Phonitor, that I knew what I wanted to do with it because I know what the bottom end sounds like. And the mag EQ, for instance, I know exactly how that sounds on a ton of different snares and claps, and how the Studer sounds on the drum bus, how the SSL sounds when it's on a mix bus, how the Renaissance Axe sounds when it's on hi-hats, how these, the Lexicon 224 and the MT250 from UAD will sound on particular things. I visualize it before I even start. Half the job is done, but you have to know your plugins to be able to do that. If you don't know your plugins, you're going to be messing around. And for me, the reason why I learn my plugins on my downtime, and whilst I'm working obviously as well, is to enable that quicker workflow, because I just want to be able to bang things out. I don't want to be messing around with a snare drum for 3 hours. It's the client does that, the producer does that, the original musicians do that. My job is to mix it down and ultimately master it as well if I'm mastering for them. And I'm the same in mastering as well. I don't take more than, I'll have my listening session, I'll make some notes. Very rarely do I take more than 20 minutes, 30 minutes for a master. Just because I feel like I lose focus. It's just how I work. I'm not saying it's the right way or the wrong way to work, but it's how I work. And I start losing focus. So I incorporate these workflows where I will work on a track for a bit, and when I start losing focus, I'll work on another track, and then I'll go back to the other track. And all these little tricks that I use to enable me to work quickly really, really suits me. So that's it. That's an insight into how I work. I like to work quickly, I like to know my plugins, and I like to stay fresh. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing and mastering tutorials and reviews. This is the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Until next time.